Now, what do we have here? A punky launch game for a console made by Insomniac Studios, featuring Yuri Lowenthal playing a snarky 20-something guy fighting against all sorts of bad guys and monsters to save the city. No, not Spider-Man. Why did you think this was Spider-Man? You clicked on the thumbnail, you knew that this wasn't about Spider-Man. Sunset Overdrive, the Xbox One game more forgotten than LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. A launch title that made a total $500 profit. That is, well, it's kinda depressing for how good this game is. Well, kinda. See, Sunset kinda jumped the gun on the wacky, brightly colored, hyper comic book style game that we see a lot more of today. Now, the art style looks like it fit in right next to Fortnite, Apex Legends, and Marvel Rivals. But it came out in 2014, 2 whole years ahead of the universal phenomenon that was Fortnite. And well, it just didn't land well with the audiences of the day. And it's not super hard to see why. It's very millennial core, a very boom equals funny type of game right on the surface.
Hey guys, I want you to meet my new friend.
Shut up, Sam.
You suck at friends, Sam.
A colorful brashness that's not quite as hardcore as other campy games like Saints Row or Borderlands, so instead of attracting older audiences that love to take the bite on edgier, more adult humor, and not really being toned down enough to attract younger audiences that need a more simplistic idea to get behind, this was kind of a teen angst punk-styled game that didn't seem to land for anybody, except for me. I loved this trailer. I can't even tell you why, but a 12-year-old Buster loved this half-shaved haircut for some crazy reason. Maybe it was the 3 days grace in me. And when it finally came out, I had a lot of fun with it. I liked the art style. I still do. There's a bit of proto-alternative punk 3D in this game. It's not quite Spider-Verse or Arcane, but you can see the first steps of that art style in projects like this back in the day. The kind of art style that Borderlands was built on, the whole comic book come-to-life type thing. But rather than making everything cel-shaded, Sunset instead went a more smoothed-out direction with it. The music has always been a favorite of mine, and this game had a whole album of British punk made to go along with it. And personally, I love it. It's not exactly Flowbots or Rage Against the Machine punk, it's more of the fuck you, I'm an adult type of Fall Out Boy punk. But there's nothing wrong with that, as much of the game follows the trend. But some of these songs just slap regardless. I couldn't tell you what the lyrics to Folding Socks even mean or are saying, but that shit bumps on my playlist at least once a week. You've already been listening to it in this video, but I mean, come on, just listen in on the bass intro. Then the whole aesthetic of the world, not just the art style, but the presentation of that style. From massive onomatopoeia when enemies explode or pop, the litany of expressions and character in the animations, the references when you die and respawn, the interactions the game has with game mechanics. Let me just say, a video game that wants to break the fourth wall, doing so by using game mechanics like the joke about the weapon wheel with Buck?
How'd you think you were gonna do that when I got this here gun?
Yeah, I got guns too.
Damn!
That's just my shit. It reminds me of the Acid River from the Deadpool game, where he uses the text bubbles of the voices inside his head to jump across the river. Sunset uses a lot of these video game specific fourth wall breaks, and it works really well. Sometimes. Other times it can be kind of cringe.
No, I could do better than that. That was just a bunch of rubbish. How too British.
Please, stop.
But for the most part, it's just kind of charming. Like the big disembodied tutorial voice that just booms and gasses you up as you play along.
Go batshit crazy!
But speaking of the tutorial, that is absolutely the worst part of this game. Like the whole first act up to the airplane mission drags a lot more than it should, just because the game has to show you slideshows every time it wants to explain a new mechanic to you. It's like the fake tutorial in Blood Dragon, but instead of being a witty one-off joke, it comes back every 10 minutes, just to give you a new thing to sit down and watch. And for a game based on momentum and getting amped up, it's a pretty solid buzzkill. Even if they try to make it more entertaining with the voiceover and displays lighting up the screen. Maybe it's just me, but this kind of humor only works when it's subtle in the corner and like you might miss it. If you're forced to sit down and watch it, it just doesn't work. Let's stop talking about the game and actually get into it. The story of this game is not very complex. Obviously, when you're firing teddy bears strapped with TNT or electrified vinyl albums at Monster Energy-based zombies, you're not here for the gripping storytelling or dead Aunt Mays. The story of Sunset Overdrive, or at least the themes, the message, can be summed up in 2 words. Be yourself. Which sounds kind of lame, but it's a fairly simple one that works well for the rebel punk stylings of the world. Whether it's the player character who's a janitor and evolves into a comic book hero, the shy D&D nerds finding out that life is real, the smart kid surrounded by rich dweebs who learns to stick up for himself and take credit for what we do.
Sam, you're the best.
Sure, anytime.
Yeah, really nice work, Sam.
A lot of the side characters have stories that basically revolve around the idea of, this is who I am, and you can't change that. Of course, it also does a fair amount of making fun of other things in the story too, like the aforementioned D&D players.
Give me a fucking gun!
The corporate world literally walling off the city and holding it in lockdown to cover up their mess after they started breakdancing on the FDA's health and safety regulations. But beside the energy drink made in RFK's America, what is the actual story of Sunset Overdrive? Well, basically everything I just said. You're in a city overrun with cyberpunkian levels of corporate overreach, said corporations skipping all the regulations and whipping up a tonic more viral than the T-virus from the Umbrella Corporation, and in the course of just 2 weeks, the city collapses. Fizzco, the creator of said drinks, walls off the city, and we're now trapped inside, trying to find a way out before instead going to take down the Corp, defeat the scary zombies, and rock and roll your way out of this colorful city. The missions themselves are kind of set up in 4 main acts. Act 1 is working with the old guy to turn a Mini Cooper into an airplane, and it also kind of serves as the prologue or the introductory where all the tutorials are. Here we meet the Oxfords, a group of survivors who get by just playing on their phones or reminding you that their super rich parents left them for dead. Act 2 is trying to find another way out because the plane plan fails, so you track down Real Kareem and his troop of senior Boy Scouts who have been holding up in a samurai museum.
Fine work. Worthy of a fine survivalist.
Then you deal with the whiteiest of all white boys who gets so mad he drinks the juice and goes full dragon. Act 3 is centered around the D&D LARPers, helping them cook up some bark soup before building a boat of literal trash to try and float out of the city. Then the finale in Act 4 is where Fizzco starts to go crazy and starts killing everyone in the city, so we turn around so we can ride a soda bottle into the headquarters building. And of course the protagonist pulls a Deadpool and rewrites this anticlimactic sacrifice into a crazy boss fight.
Whose idea was that? Yours? Or yours? Oh, bad move, guys. NeoGaf is gonna eat you alive.
And a joke that's kind of aged poorly, the fake credits where it says an order of termination is a lot more of a somber thing knowing just how little this game made as per the Insomniac leaks from last year. It's just sort of like an ironic thing now. And I mean, that's it. It's no God of War, but it's certainly a good game. Maybe not for everyone. Sure. But as someone who laughs at literally anything, I always had a good time with this game's style of humor. Some lines were a bit too millennial coded, but never to the level of that Saints reboot.
Fall in line. Balls.
Most uses of the video game world as an excuse to make a joke worked for me too. Some are meh.
Aerodynamics. How convenient.
What the fuck was that? Bitch, you think that's what I do?
But others like whipping up the weapon wheel to prove you're armed, a literal invisible wall, and constant complaining from the protagonist about the tedium of Rule of 3 fetch quests.
That dog means a lot to her.
Fine. Oh, wait, Sam. The dog is following me now.
Oh, great.
Oh no, it just committed suicide. Sorry, mission failed. What's next?
Which, while it's just blatant lamp shading and doesn't do much to take away from the tedium of them, it's at least appreciated that they made the effort. Could probably sum up the whole narrative in this one cutscene.
We just went through hell to get out of there. Why would you want to go back?
Before this whole thing started, I just floated through life, never taking anything seriously. And then horror night happened, and I know this is gonna sound crazy, but my life didn't start until the world came to an end. That's why we're going back.
What if I say no?
Semi-heroic moment ripped right out of a comic book, bookended by the most disrespectful treatment of all logic you've ever seen. But it works. The game, at the very least, is consistent in its tone, in the wackiness that it uses. Then, there's 2 big DLC expansions that both add about an hour of main story missions to play through and a series of extra enemies, new areas to explore, and some extra weapons. The first of which takes you to a water-based area off the south of the map, an oil rig taken over by some OD that doesn't add any enemies, but at least gives the effort to reskin them, also making them tougher in the area. But the Moo oil rig is fun to navigate around, with a lot of the vertical movement, the mixture of wide open water areas, and the tight corners of the rig itself. I like the jokes in it from Brill Cream's sister, who represents the entire corporate world.
You tried to kill all the union workers so you could replace them with cheaper labor?
Duh. How else do you think I earn my ridiculous salary? Who are you, anyway? Never mind. Just give me your phone. I want to deliver the good news to the board. I don't have all day.
And the boss fight being this Cthulhu crab OD that's literally called the DLC monster. It's just small little bits like that which get a small laugh out of me. But for a small little expansion that gives you a few extra hours of gameplay that isn't really recycled, as the oil rig actually plays a lot differently from other regions on the mainland. Then, the second DLC takes place in Fizco Robotics Factory, where you go past the invisible wall and fight some different robot variations for an hour or so. And these, well, this was the first section of the game that I properly actually struggled with. Fizco bots are already pretty punishing when you're not moving, and the sniper bots in the DLC area are just so much more devastating, as only a few hits will take you out, and they're damn accurate. And then this DLC basically revolves around you helping... Is that Anthony Fantano? To shut down the military bots being made by Fizco and eventually fighting Brandon Winfrey.
I'm Brandon Winfrey, and I am a boss!
Now you might not recognize that name. I didn't, but he was a community manager over the Sunset TV series, and him showing up to be what's effectively the final boss of the game, complaining about how he was always underappreciated by the players, got a good kick out of me. This is the kind of meta, fourth wall breaking things that I think Sunset does the best.
We want to thank you for all that you've done.
Don't thank me, thank them. They did all the work. Come on, wave.
Who are we waving at?
But as far as story goes, that's about it. Whether the jokes land for you, whether you like the art style, that's a much more subjective thing. It's nothing to really write home about, but it's far from the worst of the worst. It's very mid, but in a good way. In the sort of way that the Bay vs. Transformers movies are mid. Story-wise, mid as fuck, but will you have a good time regardless? Probably. Because the most important part of the game is the gameplay. It's very classic in that way. Like Lost Planet 2 or Space Marine, the story isn't all that important, nor is it center stage. It's more of a simplistic aesthetic backdrop, a vehicle to justify the world that the gameplay fits into. And megalomaniacal talking blips that bump dubstep and use Monster Mango energy drinks to turn your neighbor into your average Floridian really sets the stage for a game that'll have you swinging off power lines with a crowbar, using trash cans like Sonic the Hedgehog, and firing a shotgun that just so happens to be well endowed. But besides from the visual or aesthetic appeal of Sunset Overdrive, what is the gameplay actually like? Well, stop asking questions and let me tell you. Now, the gameplay here is split into 3 main pillars. Customization, how you choose to play, the flavors of upgrades, skills, guns, and of course style. Movement, interacting with parkour elements and bounce pads, switching from mobile to even more mobile at a moment's notice. And of course, combat. What you're shooting them with, and the very, very many different ways you have to take them on, which ties into both other pillars almost entirely. Now for the second third of that puzzle, we have the mobility, which is mighty important for Sunset Overdrive. Being on the ground playing this as a third-person shooter, you're not gonna make it far. Rather, Sunset is set up very specifically like a skater shooter, sometimes literally. The game is designed around movement and momentum. Staying on the go makes you harder to hit and allows you to fly around like nobody's business, hitting from above, picking off the elite enemies and then coming close to do massive damage once you've built up all the power that you need. The combo system all orbits around this power meter you build up, which slowly activates various amps, or character skills that you can equip. From weapon amps that add an extra dimension to your guns, there's already a good variety with weapon types from the deployables to crowd control to heavy weapons, explosives, and even high damage single shot guns, and little additions in the amps really make them feel a lot different. Let's take one for example. The Dirty Harry is a revolver you get at the very beginning of the game. With a multitude of amps, it can either become an even harder hitter, might be able to spawn a random stick of TNT in a crowd of OD, making it a pseudo crowd control weapon that can also target more elite enemies, or you could give it electric rounds to stun said elites so you can do more damage without incurring their wrath. Or even just make it set enemies on fire to combine the compensator Harry combo into a single weapon. Take a deployable area of effect gun like the acid sprinkler and give it a frost effect so it stops enemies while dealing damage over time. Give the compensator the chance to spawn random TNT teddies as it kills, creating a chain effect of fiery damage against massive swaths of OD. Or just get the murder ring, yes, murder boomerang, and electrify it so it bounces between the robots, dealing high damage and keeping them from attacking you at the same time. Basically, weapon amps add an extra dimension onto your very wide variety of guns. There's also hero amps, which give you small bonuses like dealing more damage while in the air, making fire erupt from underneath you while walking, sliding, or bouncing, summoning thunderstorms as you kill enemies, or turning yourself into a meteor with the melee attack. The different amps, in so many unique combinations, can either make you well-rounded, or maybe focus on the fire abilities that chew through the zombies. Or in the adverse, get a bunch of electrical doohickeys that lay waste to the robots. And the human enemies, well, they're just here. None of the regular humans are all that dangerous, not as interesting to fight, not when there's so many enemies to go after. Speaking of...
What the fuck? Back, man.
The first and main faction of enemies is the OD, or Overdrivers. Innocent Kyles all over Sunset City who chugged some mango monster and got addicted big time. You have your regular ODers, the basic zombies, poppers, the hardcore drinkers who get kidney stones that swell to insane proportions, the big tank monsters, the first real threat to you. Most OD can't do much to you when you're in the air, but the Herkers can throw stones, making your dominance on power lines much less effective. You can still avoid them, but with a tanky health bar, they're less so an elite and more so a sponge. But that's not a bad thing. Herkers are definitely spongy, something I'd complain about in a game like Gears of War, where the difficulty comes exclusively from enemies becoming spongier and the player getting turned into a wet piece of paper. But in Sunset, the difficulty normally comes from the amount of things you're managing all at once. A horde of regular OD, not a problem. A lone Herker, easy as pie, but a horde of OD, a few poppers ready to go when you hit the ground, and a Herker hounding you from one side. Just a few things thrown onto your plate, and now you're juggling all of them at once, and therein lies the difficulty. And also, it's fun. Thinning out the hordes, stabbing away at the Herker's health, and watching out for other elites that will interrupt your mobility really puts on the pressure and makes for a fun balance. The next enemy we meet is your girlfriend. The blowers. OD with, well, air blowers hooked up to them that they can use to fire bile at you, knocking you down from the air and putting pressure from a distance. On from them, we have your mother. Okay, I'll stop. But the spawners are just smaller Herkers, but rather than fighting really aggressively, they're more defensive. A Herker will get right up in your face, but a spawner will hide out in the background, meaning the longer you leave it alone, the more OD will come up out of it. From there, we have the freezers, who specifically disable the mobility options you have, leaving frozen blobs on wires, bounce pads, and more to force you to either go around or get thrown onto the ground, where things can get very hazy very, very quickly. There's the muggers, fast-moving leapers that attack from hard-to-reach spots before getting in close and trying to do massive damage, giving you another target to seek out that doesn't sit in the horde, something to put pressure on you from the outside. Wingers, which are flying OD that shoot laser beams? Yeah, okay. But yes, that's what they are. A little extra danger from above, balancing out the range of OD that you'll find. And for the other factions, the Scabs, Human Raiders, or the Physco security bots, they follow pretty much the same range of options. The main difference being that the Physco bots are much more focused on elite units, where they're all sufficiently a mix of tanky and dangerous individually. But the former, the Scabs, are somewhere in the middle. They're a semi-elite horde with unique soldiers that apply different aspects of the OD enemies on the battlefield and can do decent damage, but they aren't so tanky. With both Physco and Scabs, you have the regular ranged enemy, the up-close melee enemy, the specialist ranged enemy in the gunners and bomb throwers, and in Physco's case, you have the tank bots, which is more of a mini-boss that combines all of the robot powers into one enemy. Compared to the Herker, which just sort of works as a powerful support for the horde rather than a boss of any kind. On top of having all these enemies, the game does a fantastic job of feeding them to you. Each main act of the story is roughly 2 hours long, with a new enemy being thrown at you roughly every hour. Meaning that as soon as it starts to feel a little stale, the game's got something new to mix it up, and playing through it myself, it felt like the campaign flew by because of it. Onto the bosses though, they are certainly the game's weak point. Now, the missions in Sunset are pretty varied and rarely actually reuse mechanics from one to the next. One might have you using harpoons to scale a tower, forging a nuclear sword, escorting a trash boat down a river, or helping lemmings collect bark while you launch catapults from the ramparts. That being said, the bosses are some of the least interesting fights to go into. The first boss, quote-unquote, is this blimp you chased around in the aforementioned car plane, and the whole thing goes about as well as the Centaur mission from Gears of War 2. You're flying at a whole 3 miles per hour, literally slower than just grinding on the power lines, firing auto-locking missiles at a blimp while avoiding mines. For a game that's normally really energetic, it's just sort of lame. The second big boss is the fizzy balloon at the radio station, which is a bit more interesting, using a mixture of the parkour and shooting to open up damage phases. The downside here is that the boss doesn't start to really put the pressure on and lay down mines or anything else until the final phase of the fight. So by the time it's starting to get difficult or interesting, the fight is already over. The third boss is that Chinese dragon OD, which is more so a parkour thing than a boss fight, getting you to chase it down, occasionally blasting away some spikes and then riding up to melee the head. And while the animations are really cool and stylized, game-wise, there's just not a whole lot going on. The next boss, which is the only human boss, is this King of the Scabs, which you take on with the geeks. And while the roller coaster is a cool set piece, especially for the mechanics that Sunset offers, it's kind of a boring fight. Because you just glide behind the King's coaster and shoot it in the ass, dodging fire here and there until you get this Triceratops head just to headbutt him with it, and that's about it. And the final boss of the game after that anticlimactic soda bottle ending, it's just sort of the fizzy balloon fight again, but more. You're fighting the Building, a giant city-destroying robot. So the whole fight is you chasing it, doing some parkour, getting up to it, doing some sliding, bouncing, and dodging to the top, which is a bit hectic, which is my main complaint for the fizzy fight. but it's still simplistic as your only goal is to shoot it in the head, which means you can do this without putting that much thought into it. Like, at least on the radio tower you had to use bounce pads to open up the damage phase, but the building is more of a set piece, and it's fun, don't get me wrong, but it always feels like the game is holding back on doing even more with these ideas. To be honest, my least favorite part of Fizzy in the building, which is also controlled by the same AI, is that he is that stupid millennial cuss machine I called out Saints Row for earlier. It's not as egregious in Sunset because he's one character who shows up twice, but it still makes him a lot more annoying than a threat or anything else. But that's about it for enemies and boss fights. So what about the loudest part of the gameplay that's right on the cover? The actual customization of your character. Well, it's there. The game has a litany of different styles, all blown up in this extreme art style of the game, using physics-driven accessories, hair, and more to make you stand out in an already extremely colorful world. Shameless self-promotion, since I mentioned it, if you go down below to a video, you'll see multiple links to my merch store featuring my colorful world line of selections, along with no hesitation if you want something darker, or if you just want something with my dumb logo on it. This isn't to support this channel, actually 100% of the profits I make on merch gets donated directly to my local food bank. But as far as customizing your character, there's a lot of options afforded to you. From body types, to the face, to the headwear, to the clothes, to tattoos, to every little bit, and of those, there's dozens of options to pick from to make either your perfect superhero or an absolutely degenerate person with a kangaroo face for a codpiece. I mean, my protagonist is a bit basic. I know he just sort of looks like a gay Matt Walsh. Sorry. Like regular Matt Walsh, but there's a lot of room for expression and style, as there should be for a game and world that prides itself on expression of characters, art, and music. It's not always my favorite as far as customization options in games go, but only that I think some of the options are made worse by the over-designed styles, but that's more of a subjective route. For the world and for what Sunset Overdrive is, most of these, if not all of these options, fit perfectly for it. The most annoying part is that there aren't multiple saves. Thankfully, your character is not permanent, you can change their face, sex, and every little detail pretty much at any time, but there is straight up no way to start a new game. The only way to restart from level 0 and go through the game again is to delete your save data from the Xbox Cloud entirely. Then you can restart, but otherwise you're stuck with a singular save file, which I actually had to do when I was getting ready to play and record this game. So it's been 11 years since this game came out. It unfortunately flopped and now kind of exists as the sad little brother to Insomniac's Spider-Man series. Now, personally, replaying this game in the last month or so, I think I like this more than Spider-Man. At least Spider-Man 2, which kind of bored me to the end. And in 2025, it's still a lot of fun. The gameplay is really unique, and there's not really anything else I can think of that fits the vibe of skater horde shooter, to the same extent that Sunset is able to pull off. The environment is fun and interesting to get into, the art style is fantastic and dripping with flavorful personality. The characters are kind of meh at worst, but when they work, they work. The soundtrack is absolutely one of my favorites when it comes to video game music. There's loads of enemy variety and a lot of interesting missions that never get too repetitive in the campaign. I could talk more about this game and might do a full retrospective on it in the future, but with such a solid foundation, I'm just annoyed that this will never get a chance to have a sequel. But if you're on Xbox and you get the chance, check it out, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with it.
Can you survive the many dangers? Can you help others survive? Can you save Sunset City? Can you? For the love of God, can you? Of course you can. It's a f***ing video game.
But with that, we're at the end. Thank you very much for watching. If you've liked this, be sure to subscribe, share, and like the video. If you want to support what I do here on YouTube, you can become a member or a patron and get access to every single one of my videos up to a week early, with some extra bonuses like being able to read my scripts and some other behind-the-scenes content. As always, stay cool, have fun, and be awesome. Buster out.